Imagine a man standing on a mountain ridge at dusk. The sky is painted with fire and ash, the last light of the sun disappearing behind the horizon. Down below, you can hear the laughter of the village, the songs, the familiar rhythms of life. But this man does not turn back. He stands still, facing the unknown, a shadow among shadows. People may think he is lost, but he knows something they don't. He was never meant to walk with the crowd. He was meant to walk alone, and perhaps that is the hardest truth about being chosen. The path ahead is rarely lit, rarely crowded, and never easy. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." Yet, he also understood that to become who you truly are often means peeling away the layers of who the world wants you to be. That process is not celebrated. It is resisted. And when you resist the script that everyone else follows, you begin to stand out. But standing out does not always mean standing above. It can mean standing apart. That is why the chosen man, the man who dares to listen to the whisper of his own soul, always walks alone. Let me tell you a story. There was a boy named Elias. From the earliest days of his childhood, Elias noticed things others did not. While the other children were busy playing in the fields, he would sit by the old oak tree and stare at the way the light filtered through its leaves. He felt the world was speaking to him in ways others could not hear. His friends would laugh and call him strange. His parents would worry that he spent too much time in silence. But Elias was not lonely in those moments. He was listening. He was learning. Still, as he grew, he began to feel the weight of separation. When you are young, the urge to belong is powerful. He tried to join in, to laugh when others laughed, to talk as they talked, but every attempt felt forced, as though he was wearing a costume. And when he lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, he would feel an emptiness settle in his chest, not because he lacked people around him, but because he lacked the ability to betray himself for their approval. Something inside whispered to him that his path was different, though he could not yet understand what that truly meant. This is the paradox of the chosen man. He feels both drawn to people and separate from them. He longs for connection, yet connection feels shallow when it requires him to silence the voice inside. Jung believed that this tension is part of individuation, the process of becoming whole. The chosen man cannot settle for borrowed truths. He cannot follow blindly. He must discover. He must confront. He must walk into the wilderness of his own mind, and that wilderness is never crowded. Elias grew into a young man, and the gap between him and others widened. His peers pursued what society expected: wealth, recognition, comfort. They talked about possessions, about status, about the safe roads. Elias tried to share in their enthusiasm, but he felt like a stranger in their world. It was not arrogance. It was an ache. He wanted to belong, yet belonging required surrendering a piece of himself, and that he could not do. He would often walk out of gatherings and find himself alone under the stars, staring at the vast sky and wondering why he felt both cursed and blessed at the same time. And perhaps you have felt this too, that sense that you are not broken, but you are different, that deep suspicion that while others are content to move with the current, you are meant to swim against it. It is a heavy feeling, and sometimes it feels unbearable. You may wonder why you can't just be like everyone else. Why laughter in the crowd feels empty. Why silence feels more like truth. This is not weakness. This is the mark of being chosen. But being chosen is not easy. It means you will be misunderstood. People will misinterpret your quiet as arrogance, your independence as rejection, your searching as confusion. You may even believe them for a while. You may think something is wrong with you. But slowly, if you are brave enough, you will realize the truth. The chosen man is not called to walk the path of comfort. He is called to walk the path of discovery. And discovery demands solitude. Elias's solitude became his teacher. Alone with his thoughts, he discovered that silence is not empty. It is full. Full of questions, full of answers, full of whispers from the unconscious. Jung would have called this the self, the deeper center of who we are, the blueprint of our true being. And Elias, like many chosen men before him, began to hear its voice. It spoke in fragments, in symbols, in dreams. It urged him to look beyond the surface, to face the truths others avoided, to confront his own fears. But with this gift came a curse. The deeper he went into himself, the further he felt from others. He longed to share what he was learning, but when he tried, people would laugh or dismiss him. They were too busy with the noise of life to listen to the music of silence. And so, Elias carried his discoveries alone, storing them in the secret chambers of his heart. If you have ever felt this weight, you are not alone. The chosen man's path is littered with doubts, with nights that feel endless, with days when you wonder if you are lost. But what feels like exile is often initiation. The loneliness is not punishment, it is preparation. In solitude, the chosen man is stripped of illusions. He learns resilience. He learns clarity. He learns to trust the voice within, even when the world outside mocks him. And then, something changes. Over time, Elias began to see his solitude differently. He realized that the crowd was not rejecting him. It simply could not follow him. His path was too narrow, too steep, too demanding. It was a path only meant for him. And suddenly, his loneliness transformed into something else, strength. He understood what Jung meant when he said that the man who looks inside awakens. Elias had awakened, and once you awaken, you can never go back to sleep. The chosen man always walks alone, not because he loves isolation, but because truth demands it. To hear the whispers of the soul, you must silence the shouts of the world. To see clearly, you must step away from the fog of conformity. To carry light, you must first endure darkness. And so, Elias walked on, not as a victim of loneliness, but as a student of it. And that is the lesson for you as well. If you feel distant, if you feel apart, if you feel like your path is different, it is because it is. And though it is painful, though it feels endless, there is meaning in it. Solitude is not emptiness. It is preparation. But here's the thing most people never tell you about walking alone. It hurts before it heals. In the beginning, Elias felt as though he was carrying a burden too heavy for his shoulders. The quiet was deafening, the nights too long, the silence too sharp. There were moments when he almost begged for noise, for company, for someone, anyone, to simply understand him. Yet the world kept moving on, blind to his struggle, and in those hours, he felt the cold truth of solitude. And maybe you felt this too, that ache in your chest when you realize you cannot explain your thoughts to anyone around you. That strange disconnection when you laugh at the same jokes, but deep down, you feel hollow. That frustration when your dreams seem too wild, too deep, too unusual to share. These are the scars of being chosen. Jung often spoke about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide or deny. But for the chosen man, the shadow is not only within him, it stretches across the world he lives in. He sees the falseness in society, the masks people wear, the truths they bury. And once you see, you cannot unsee. Elias began to notice that the world was not built for truth, but for comfort. People preferred illusions that made them feel safe rather than truths that demanded change. He would watch as his friends repeated patterns that made them miserable, as families clung to traditions that suffocated them, as men pursued success, yet woke up each day more hollow than before. It broke his heart, but it also hardened his resolve. He realized that if he was to remain true to himself, he could not join them. He had to walk forward, no matter how lonely the road felt. There came a night when Elias sat by the river under a full moon. He stared at the water and whispered to himself, "Why me? Why do I feel different? Why can't I be like them?" And in that silence, as the river carried his reflection, he understood something that would stay with him forever. The chosen man does not choose his path, it chooses him. He cannot abandon it, because it is etched into his very being. To betray it would be to betray himself. And so, he accepted the loneliness, not as a punishment, but as a companion. From that moment, he stopped fighting the silence and began to listen to it. And the more he listened, the more he realized that solitude was not empty, it was alive. In solitude, he could hear the voice of the self, guiding him toward what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole. As the years passed, Elias grew stronger, not because life became easier, but because he stopped expecting it to be easy. He learned that being misunderstood was part of his calling. He learned that rejection was redirection, and he discovered that the loneliness he once feared was in fact shaping him into something greater. There's a reason Jung believed that the path to wholeness is narrow and often walked alone. If everyone could walk it, it wouldn't be sacred. If everyone could carry it, it wouldn't transform you. The chosen man carries not only his own soul, but also the weight of truths the world refuses to face. He becomes a bridge between the unconscious and the conscious, between the hidden and the seen. And that bridge is not built in crowds. It is built in silence, stone by stone, step by step. But let's pause here. Imagine your own life for a moment. How many times have you felt out of place? How many times have you sat in a room full of people and still felt alone? How many times have you tried to explain what burns inside you, only to be met with blank stares? If you have lived this, then you are closer to understanding Elias, closer to understanding why Jung believed the chosen man always walks alone. For Elias, solitude became a kind of training ground. He learned patience when the world moved faster than he did. He learned clarity when the world clouded itself in noise. And he learned strength when the weight of misunderstanding threatened to crush him. Slowly, he began to realize that the man who walks alone learns to stand on his own feet, while the man who always walks with others depends on the crowd to keep him upright. There's a strange kind of freedom in walking alone. At first, it feels like exile, but then it begins to feel like liberation. No one controls your steps. No one dictates your pace. No one tells you who you must be. You are guided only by the compass of your own soul. And though it is terrifying, it is also exhilarating. Elias began to taste that freedom. And once a man tastes it, he can never go back to chains, no matter how comfortable those chains may look. This is what Jung meant when he spoke about individuation being both a privilege and a burden. The chosen man carries the burden of isolation, but he also carries the privilege of freedom. He may not walk with the crowd, but he walks with truth, and truth, though heavy, is worth carrying. One evening, Elias was approached by an old friend. The friend laughed, saying, "Why do you always isolate yourself? Why do you walk alone? Don't you see you're missing out on life?" Elias smiled gently and replied, "I am not missing life. I am meeting it." His friend did not understand, and perhaps he never would, but Elias had stopped needing others to understand. That was the day he realized he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer walking alone because he was lost. He was walking alone because he was found. And that is the strange paradox of being chosen. At first, solitude feels like a curse. Then it becomes your teacher. And finally, it becomes your power. The man who dares to endure solitude is the man who discovers who he truly is. So if you feel alone, if you feel different, if you feel like your path is not meant to be crowded, remember Elias. Remember that Jung taught us that solitude is not abandonment. It is transformation. And maybe, just maybe, your loneliness is not a wound, but a doorway. A doorway to becoming who you were always meant to be. Elias's solitude carried him further than he ever imagined. With each year, he found himself pulled deeper into the mysteries of the soul. He noticed how his dreams spoke to him, carrying symbols and images that seemed to hold hidden meanings. At first, they frightened him. Strange figures, shadows, animals that stalked him through forests, storms that swallowed the earth. Night after night, he woke with his heart pounding. But slowly, he realized these dreams were not enemies. They were messages. Jung believed dreams are the language of the unconscious, and Elias was beginning to learn this language. One night, he dreamt he was standing in a crowded marketplace. People were shouting, laughing, bargaining, but suddenly the noise began to fade. He turned, and there was a narrow road leading out of the market, a road no one else noticed. Without thinking, he walked down that road, and as he did, he heard a voice whisper, "Few will follow, but this is the only way." He woke up trembling, yet also certain. His loneliness was not an accident. It was a calling, but callings are never simple. The more Elias followed his path, the more resistance he faced. Friends accused him of wasting his youth. Family whispered about his strange ways. Some even mocked him, saying he was chasing shadows. And in his quiet moments, Elias wondered if they were right. Maybe he was fooling himself. Maybe solitude was not strength, but weakness. Maybe he was not chosen, just lost. It was during one of these darker periods that Elias encountered what Jung described as the shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves we deny, the hidden fears, anger, doubts, and desires that we refuse to face. Alone, Elias could no longer hide from it. His shadow crept into his thoughts, whispering that he was worthless, that he would die forgotten, that his solitude was proof of his failure. These whispers grew louder, almost unbearable, and for a time, Elias felt consumed by them. But here lies the true test of the chosen man. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." To become whole, Elias had to face his shadow. He had to look directly into the darkness of his own soul and refuse to run. And so he did. Night after night, he sat in silence, confronting the voices inside. He admitted his fears, confessed his anger, acknowledged his longing. He stopped pretending to be pure and began to accept that he was human, fragile, flawed, and full of contradictions. And strangely enough, by facing his shadow, he began to feel lighter. The darkness did not disappear, but it stopped controlling him. It became part of him, not his master. This was the turning point. Elias realized that walking alone was not just about being different from others. It was about being honest with himself. When you walk with the crowd, it is easy to wear a mask, to hide behind noise, to ignore your own depths. But when you walk alone, there is nowhere to hide. You must face yourself fully, and in doing so, you discover a strength that cannot be shaken. Over time, Elias's solitude became less of a wound and more of a sanctuary. He began to notice beauty in the small things others overlooked, the sound of rain tapping against the window, the rhythm of his own heartbeat, the way silence could stretch into eternity. He found that solitude sharpened his mind, deepened his soul, and opened his eyes to truths that crowds would never see. And here's the irony. The more he embraced his solitude, the more people began to notice something different about him. His silence carried weight. His words, though few, cut deeper than endless chatter. His presence alone brought calm to the room. People did not fully understand him, but they sensed there was something about him that they lacked. This is the paradox Jung often pointed to. When a man dares to walk alone, when he dares to become who he truly is, he ends up influencing others more than those who spent their lives trying to fit in. Elias was not trying to impress anyone, yet people began to seek his presence. He was not chasing approval, yet respect began to find him. And that's the secret most never see. The chosen man may walk alone, but in doing so he carries light. And light, no matter how quiet, draws others in. But Elias also knew this. He could not return to the crowd. Not fully. He could share what he had learned, but he could never again lose himself in the noise. He belonged to the path now, and that path was narrow, steep, and often lonely. Yet it was also rich with meaning, filled with truths worth more than gold. Maybe this is your story too. Maybe you have felt the weight of solitude pressing down on you. Maybe you have questioned whether your difference is a flaw. Maybe you have feared that you are walking through life unseen, unheard, misunderstood. But if you feel this, take heart. The chosen man is rarely understood at first. His solitude is not failure. It is formation. It is the fire that shapes him into someone capable of carrying truths others cannot bear. Elias, like many before him, came to see that walking alone was not the end of his journey. It was the beginning. It prepared him for what was to come. It gave him clarity to see through illusions, courage to face his shadow, and strength to live by truth rather than by comfort. And though the world may never fully understand him, he no longer needed it to. Because once you realize that solitude is not emptiness, but transformation, you are never truly alone. You walk with your soul. You walk with truth. And that is enough. There came a time when Elias realized his solitude had carved something within him that could never be taken away. What once felt like a wound had become a well. From that well, he drew patience, insight, and strength. He no longer feared silence. He welcomed it. Silence became his companion, his confidant, his sanctuary. But as he grew, Elias also began to notice something else. The more he embraced solitude, the more the world began to test him. It was as if life itself wanted to know if he truly understood what it meant to be chosen. Doors would close. Opportunities would vanish. People he once trusted would leave. At times, it felt like betrayal. At times, it felt like abandonment. And in his darkest hours, Elias wondered if solitude would eventually swallow him whole. One night, as he sat by the fire in his small home, he felt the weight of the world pressing on his chest. The silence, once comforting, felt suffocating. He whispered, almost in desperation, "Why me? Why this path? Why must I always be alone?" The flames flickered. Shadows danced against the walls, and in that moment, he remembered Jung's words. In all chaos there is a cosmos. In all disorder a secret order. Those words sank into him like water into dry soil. What if the chaos of his solitude was not punishment, but preparation? What if the disorder he felt was shaping him into someone capable of carrying deeper truths? The thought did not erase the loneliness, but it gave it meaning. And when suffering has meaning, it becomes bearable. Elias began to see that being chosen was never about comfort. It was about responsibility. The chosen man is not chosen to be admired, but to carry what others cannot. He becomes the one who ventures into the darkness, so that others may have light. He becomes the one who bears silence, so that others may hear truth. He becomes the one who accepts loneliness, so that others may find belonging. And though it costs him dearly, he pays the price, because something in his soul knows there is no other way. Over the years, Elias noticed people came to him not for entertainment, but for wisdom. They would sit with him in silence and somehow leave lighter. They would ask him questions, and though his answers were simple, they cut through the noise of their lives. Elias was not seeking followers, yet people began to follow, not because he demanded it, but because he lived what they secretly longed for: authenticity, courage, freedom. And yet, even as others began to gather, Elias never forgot the truth. He was still alone in his calling. He could guide others, but he could not walk their paths for them. He could offer light, but they had to choose to carry it. This was the unspoken burden of the chosen man. He can inspire, but he cannot rescue. Each person must face their own shadow, their own solitude, their own journey. This realization freed him. He stopped trying to explain himself to those who could not understand. He stopped chasing approval from those who would never give it. He stopped longing for the crowd to accept him. Instead, he accepted himself. And in doing so, he discovered a freedom deeper than he had ever known. It is here that we must pause and reflect. Have you ever felt the weight of walking alone? Have you ever questioned if your difference was a flaw? Have you ever longed for the crowd to understand you, only to be disappointed time and time again? If so, then perhaps your solitude, like Elias's, is not punishment. Perhaps it is your path. Perhaps it is shaping you into someone capable of carrying light in a world that prefers darkness. Jung believed that wholeness is found not in denying who we are, but in embracing it fully, the light and the dark, the joy and the sorrow, the solitude and the belonging. The chosen man always walks alone because he refuses to betray his soul for the comfort of the crowd. And though it isolates him, it also transforms him. Elias finally understood this truth one evening as he stood once again on the mountain ridge, the same ridge where, years earlier, he had first felt the sting of separation. This time, the village below was still alive with laughter and music, but Elias did not feel torn between staying or leaving. He stood tall, gazing at the horizon, his heart steady. He knew now that his path was not theirs, and for the first time, he felt peace. Walking alone did not mean being without purpose. It meant being true. Walking alone did not mean being forgotten. It meant being forged. Walking alone did not mean being broken. It meant being chosen, and that is the mystery of the chosen man. At first, solitude feels like exile. Then it feels like education. And finally, it becomes elevation. The crowd may never understand him, but the chosen man does not live for the crowd. He lives for truth. He lives for the calling that burns within his soul. And in the end, he realizes something extraordinary. He was never truly alone. For within him, the self, the eternal unshakable essence of who he is, has always walked beside him. Elias stood on that mountain ridge, watching the sun dissolve into the horizon. The sky burned with shades of gold, crimson, and violet, and for the first time in his life, he did not see the colors as symbols of what he lacked, but as reflections of what he had become. The silence wrapped around him, not as a cloak of loneliness, but as a crown of strength. It was then he understood fully that the chosen path was never about distance from others, but closeness to truth. To live authentically, he had to accept that he would always walk a step apart, carrying something that few could see and even fewer could carry themselves. He thought of the crowd in the village, of their laughter, of their rituals, of the sameness that had once tempted him. He no longer felt bitterness toward them. They were not weak. They were simply not called to the same fire. And in his heart, he wished them well, for he knew that each soul must awaken in its own time. To judge them would be to betray the very lesson solitude had taught him, that everyone walks at their own pace toward the light. The stars began to emerge, sharp and brilliant against the fading twilight. Elias breathed deeply, feeling the vastness of the universe press upon him, and instead of fear, he felt belonging. His solitude was no longer a prison. It was a bridge that connected him not only to his inner depths, but to something greater than himself. Jung had once written that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And Elias now lived that privilege. He had paid for it with tears, with silence, with rejection, but he had gained something far more enduring, selfhood. As he descended the mountain, he carried himself with a quiet dignity. The people he passed noticed the calm in his eyes, the steadiness of his presence. Some felt uneasy, for his existence was a mirror to their unacknowledged emptiness. Others felt drawn, sensing that he carried a peace they could not name, but desperately longed for. Elias did not try to persuade them, nor did he seek their approval. He simply walked, and in walking he bore witness to the truth that one man walking alone could still carry light for many. In time, those who were ready began to follow his example, not because he demanded it, but because he lived it. They too began to embrace silence, to face their shadows, to step apart from the endless noise. And in doing so, they discovered that solitude was not emptiness, but fullness, not exile, but initiation. Elias had become a living testimony that to walk alone is not to be forgotten, but to be prepared for a higher purpose. For those who looked closer, they saw that his solitude had not hardened him, but softened him. His heart was not closed, but wide open. He listened more deeply than others, not because he was superior, but because silence had taught him to hear what most people miss. He saw beauty in small things, strength in brokenness, and meaning in suffering. The chosen path had not stripped him of humanity. It had made him more human. And so the paradox became clear. The chosen man always walks alone, yet in that aloneness, he becomes a companion to the world. He carries burdens unseen. He suffers trials unspoken. But through it all, he becomes a vessel of light. Not perfect, not without wounds, but whole. Wholeness is never about avoiding struggle. It is about integrating it into the soul's journey until even pain becomes part of the story of becoming. Perhaps, as you listen to this, you too feel the sting of solitude. Perhaps you too have wondered why your path feels different, why you cannot blend into the crowd no matter how hard you try. If so, take heart. Your difference is not your weakness. It is your calling. Your solitude is not abandonment. It is preparation. And though the road may be long and heavy, remember this. Every step you take in authenticity is a step toward the life you were born to live. Elias's story is not just his. It is the story of every soul who has dared to choose truth over comfort, meaning over conformity, and selfhood over approval. To walk alone is to walk with courage. To walk alone is to walk with purpose. And in the end, to walk alone is to discover that you were never truly alone. For within you, the self, the eternal core that Jung spoke of, has always been with you, guiding, shaping, carrying you forward. The night grew quiet around Elias as the stars multiplied above him. He felt a peace so deep that words could not touch it. For he had learned the secret of solitude. It was never exile. It was elevation. The chosen man always walks alone, not because he is abandoned, but because he is called. And that calling, though heavy, is also holy. So if you feel the path beneath your feet grow narrow, if you feel the crowd fall away, do not despair. You are not lost. You are being led. And one day, you will look back as Elias did and realize that every step alone was shaping you into who you were always meant to be. And perhaps when that day comes, you too will stand at the edge of the horizon, look into the vastness of the sky, and whisper with peace in your heart, I was never alone. I was chosen.